I was 24 when I started my career in advertising. It was 1993, and I took a job at Arnold as a junior copywriter. And my father, Ed Eskandarian, he was the CEO and owner at the time. And let me tell you, it is not easy being the boss's daughter, especially when deep down you've always known you were his son. I first verbalized this when I was around 5 years old. I came out to my grandmother. I just didn't know that's what I was doing. Neither did she. Surprise. We were at her summer cottage on the Cape, and my older sister Wendy and I were sitting in the family room coloring, and Graham was getting dinner ready, and she was coming from the kitchen to the dining room with platters of food passing by us. And on her last pass, she said, "Come on, girls, dinner's ready." And my sister sprang up immediately and followed her to the table. I didn't flinch. I honestly did not think she was talking to me. So I kept coloring. And a minute or so later, she came over to me and she said, "Didn't you hear me calling you?" And I said, "No." And she said, "I said, come on, girls." And I looked at her like she was insane. And I said, "I'm not a girl." She said, yes, you are." And I said, "No, I'm not. I'm a boy." And she said, "No, you're not, sweetheart." And I said, "Well, then I'm gonna be. I'm also a Taurus, just so you know." And she said, "You can't, darling." And she smiled sympathetically at me and walked back into the kitchen. And I remember being left there thinking, whatever, Graham, I'm going to make this happen with or without you. I was racking my brain trying to figure out how could she possibly make this mistake? Are other people making this mistake? So, I started trying to figure out, and according to my 5-year-old brain, the only difference between boys and girls was that boys had short hair and girls had long hair. So I told my mom I want my hair cut like daddy's. Problem solved. So I thought. It wasn't until the following summer when I realized I was lacking certain equipment. I was back at Graham's. That seemed to be where everything happened. But this time, I was with Wendy and my younger cousin Adam, and we were out on the back deck having popsicles. And Adam nudges me, and he says, "Watch this." And then he turns to the side, and he pees in a perfect arc right over the deck rail. And I was like, "Oh my God, how did you do that?" When I pee, it goes straight down. So I actually thought it was some kind of magic trick that he was doing. I think I said, "Do you have a squirt gun in there? Like what?" And my sister is like, "Duh, he has a penis." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, of course." And then I'm like thinking, what is a penis? And how come I don't have one? But, it was very hard being 6 years old, trying to rationalize it. So I figured, okay, well, maybe mine just hasn't grown yet. I'm sure it'll grow. I'm kind of short, kids grow in heights at all different times. I'm sure it'll grow. Well, that never happened. And I began to realize something was terribly, terribly wrong. And every night I would pray that somehow, some way, my body would turn into a boy's body, and everybody would finally realize they were all wrong for thinking that I was a girl. My body changed all right, just not the way I'd hoped. Puberty hit, and my body betrayed me in the worst possible ways that I could ever imagine. And I knew then that I was stuck. I was stuck in this body that I hated and stuck being a girl for the rest of my life. I became deeply, deeply depressed. My whole personality changed. I was no longer the fun-loving kid I used to be. I was angry all the time, snapping at everybody. I'd hold it together at school, so I wouldn't lose all my friends. But I'd get home and I'd take it out on my family. In junior high and high school, I knew I was attracted to girls, so I thought I must be gay. This is actually a very common mistake at first. A lot of people think being transgender is like an extreme form of being gay. It's hard for people to understand that gender identity and sexual orientation are two completely separate and unrelated things. One way to understand it is sexual orientation is who you go to bed with, and gender identity is who you go to bed as. But I didn't know any of that at the time. All I knew was, oh my God, I think I'm gay, and that was traumatizing enough for me. I mean, this was the early 80s. Nobody was openly gay. Certainly nobody in white, upper-class suburbia where I grew up. I mean, there was definitely no gayglers, I can tell you that. There weren't even any celebrities that were out. There was no Ellen, no Will and Grace, no Modern Family. George Michael was still in the closet, for God's sake, and those were the Wham years. So he's bopping around on stage in white capri pants singing Wake Me Up Before You Go-Go, and, girls everywhere actually thought they had a chance. The problem was, when I looked up the definition of the word gay, and I did, that's how I am, I'm very thorough. All it said was basically someone who's attracted to someone of the same sex. It didn't say anything about feeling like you were in the wrong body or wanting to become the opposite sex. So then I figured, oh great, I'm this freak and I'm ashamed and there's no way I am ever going to tell anybody how I really feel inside, especially not my family. I couldn't bear the thought of humiliating them and the thought of them being ashamed of me. It got to a point where I could not envision a future for myself, one in which I'd be happy anyway. So senior year of high school, I made a decision. I decided I would go to college, party it up for 4 years, and then kill myself after graduation. Now, the first part of the plan was easy. I'd already gotten into Colgate, which was ranked the #1 party school in the US that year. So I majored in psychology and minored in keg stands. Or maybe it was the other way around. But graduation came and went, and I just couldn't bring myself to follow through with the rest of the plan. So where did that leave me? Well, when you get to a point in your life where you don't want to live it anymore, you have two choices. You can either end it or you can change it. And since I couldn't bring myself to end it, I knew I had to change it. Well, lucky for me, I had 3 things going for me. The first was a loving and supportive family, and this is sadly something a lot of trans kids do not have, and it's a big reason why the suicide attempt rate for trans youth is near 50%. 50. Now, I'm not saying when I finally told my parents, they were like, well, let's go get you some surgery, and take care of it. I described their reaction as cautiously supportive. It was a lot to take in back then in the early 90s. It was very little information out there. Certainly no success stories to point to. There was nobody that they could look at and say, oh, well, that person did it and they turned out fine. Chris will be fine. There was nobody. And surgery was nowhere near where it is today, especially going from female to male. It's a lot harder to add than it is to subtract, if you know what I mean. So they were scared. They were scared I was going to go through all of this publicly, only to end up worse off, losing my friends and becoming a social outcast and not being happy with my body after going through it. I remember a few weeks after I had told them, my dad had been processing it. And he said to me very hopefully, do you think you could just stay the way you are? Maybe keep it inside and go as you're going now, and maybe just consider this your handicap? And I looked at him and I said, this is my identity. It's not something that I can compartmentalize, put on a shelf, and forget about. It's who I am every day. And if I have to keep living my life as a girl, I'd just rather not live it at all. And he hugged me, and he said that we would get through this together as a family. And it was that feeling of finally not being alone in this anymore that gave me the hope and the courage to take the next step. Which brings me to the second thing I had going for me. Some damn good therapy. Finding the right therapist was very hard because there weren't many that had experience with gender identity issues. But I found one. And having the right therapist was critical to my getting through my transition as successfully as I did. Anyone who knows me, Matt knows me a little bit, knows that I am a worrier. I worry about everything. It's in my DNA. And to give you an idea, in high school, I was voted most likely to get an ulcer. So you can imagine when it came to something as pivotal as changing my gender in front of every single person I knew, I was consumed with worry. Worry about what are people going to think or say or do. It was paralyzing. I figured my therapist is just going to tell me, well, you can't worry about what you can't control. But she didn't. Instead, she said to me, well, you can actually control how other people treat you. And I looked at her and she said, the way you act can actually shape the way other people react. And it clicked something in me. It was like unlocking the secret inner power I didn't know I had. And it was that power that gave me the balls to change my life, which is why I hold my therapist in such high regard. Doesn't mean I didn't want to kill her at times, especially in the beginning. I remember the very first session I had with her. I walked into her office in Central Square, and she opened the door, and she was exactly what I pictured a Cambridge therapist would look like. Like medium length, straight brown hair, graying, parted in the middle, big round glasses, turtleneck sweater, chunky necklace, corduroys, sensible all-weather walking shoes, Subaru Outback parked in front. Anyway, I go in there, and we sit down, and she's staring at me, and I'm staring at her, and we're just having a staring contest. Until finally I was like, okay, where should we start? Where do you want to start? I don't know, wherever you think is best. Where do you think is best? Oh my God. I mean, you go to a therapist because you want a professional to tell you what to do. But she was all about the questions. Every session, constantly challenging my feelings and understanding about gender. And I will say, as annoying as it was actually a very good thing. My initial plan was to move away and go and transition somewhere where nobody knew me. And she got me to realize I was going to need a lot of support to get through something like this, and to move somewhere where I had no family, no friends, and try to do this in secret. While it might sound appealing short term, in the long run, it could end up being much, much more stressful and harder to do. So she was the one who opened me up to the idea of staying in Boston and transitioning at Arnold. Which leads me to the third thing. I worked in advertising. So I was able to take the branding and marketing principles that I was applying to my client's business and use them to rebrand myself. And before I get to that, I think there's a big myth out there that someone decides they're transgender and boom, they show up to work the next day in a wig and a dress, or, in my case, a haircut and a coat and tie or something. But that's not the case. While some people choose to go about it that way, everybody handles their transition very, very differently. And to understand my strategy, you have to understand one more thing about my personality. I am not type A. I am type A+. Maybe even A++. I am a strategizer, a planner. I plan out everything. So when it came to something as important as my transition, you can bet your ass I planned the shit out of that thing. It was like 9 months worth of planning. Okay, so what did I do? Well, in advertising, what we always do is we take a look at the landscape, see what's going on around us. So let me paint the picture for you. At this point, it's 1995. Transgender isn't even a word at this point. The word that was out there was transsexual. Very, very negative connotations to that word. Don't use it. But that was the only word that was out there, and the only points of reference people had to that word was from the media. Movies like The Silence of the Lambs. Anybody seen this? You may remember Hannibal Lecter, but the villain that they were chasing, Buffalo Bill, was a frustrated transsexual who was mental and skinned women so he could sew a female body together for himself. Nice. Even comedies like Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. Spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen it, Lois Einhorn is actually Ray Finkel, a mentally unstable transsexual. And then, of course, there are these stellar guests on Jerry Springer, as seen in this episode entitled Tranny-licious. So I had my work cut out for me, When it came to changing perceptions, I didn't only have to rebrand myself, I had to rebrand an entire category, which I'm sure you guys know is not an easy task. So what was my brand message going to be? Well, that was easy. Basically, I wanted to prove to people that I am not a whack job like the media might portray, that I'm normal, and that I'm still the same person on the inside, just a little bit different on the outside. So because I was the first and only person at this point to publicly go through a gender transition, I knew it was up to me, based on what my therapist had taught me, that the way I act can shape the way other people react. It was up to me to set an example. So I decided right away I was not going to be meek or ashamed or secretive about my transition. Instead, I was going to be open and honest, an educator, willing to answer questions and volunteer information. I'm an oversharer to begin with, so that was really just an extension of my personality. The other thing about my personality that came in handy was my sense of humor. So I made a point to use my sense of humor to put other people at ease. The last thing I wanted was for coworkers to avoid me out of fear of saying the wrong thing, which is a tendency we all have to do in awkward situations. And, I wanted them to know if they got the pronoun wrong, I wasn't going to bite their head off, just show them I wasn't so sensitive about it. And the first time I did this was just an involuntary reaction. I couldn't help myself. I was walking down the hall toward the AV suite, and the editor happened to be explaining to her intern what all of the adapter cables were. And she held up the 90s equivalent of this one and said, "This is a female to male." And I was right outside her door, and I just leaned in and I said, "Hey, stop talking about me." And they laughed, and it got around. And, the summer outing was a couple weeks later. I had a field day with that. So I found that it really did help. I was told it helped too. Okay, I know this is going to be hard for a lot of you to imagine, but there was no real internet yet. You couldn't Google anything, there was no Google. So what was formerly a disadvantage to me as I was growing up and struggling to understand what was going on with me and what transgender was, it was now an advantage to me in that I had virtually complete control over the information. I would share only what I wanted people to know and tell the story my way. So how was I going to do that? Well, I knew the best way would be for it to come from me personally. Nobody can tell my story like I can. And because of my father's position at the company, I decided, okay, the first thing I really should tell the executive board. I could do a whole talk on that alone. But I, out of respect, I wanted them to know first. I did not want gossip trickling up. Okay, so let's say I tell the executive board. What about the rest of the hundreds of people at the agency? How are they going to find out? I didn't want the board sending out a memo, and I was not about to stand up and call an agency meeting and announce it. And this is where my background really came in handy. The big thing at the time in the business was evangelism marketing. And evangelism marketing is basically, encouraging people to take a role in actively spreading the word on your behalf in a positive way. Today you'd call it word of mouth. It's cooler, doesn't sound religious. But back then it was called evangelism marketing. We had just won Volkswagen. It was the big thing. And so at Arnold, the big push was turning consumers into brand evangelists for our clients. And it hit me, well, why not turn my coworkers into brand evangelists for me? And that's what I did. So before I told the board, one by one, I came out to 12 of my closest friends at the agency, told them my story in great detail, coached them on how to tell it to other people, had them practice on me, which was a very good idea. And then I told them the date of the board meeting, and that once it was over, to just go forth and start spreading the word. So the board meeting was a Monday from 4 to 6 p.m., and I would say by 11 a.m. the next morning, the whole agency knew, the whole advertising community knew. People outside knew. It was crazy. And I can see a lot of you look nonplussed. But just remember, there was no texting, there was no Snapchat, there weren't even any smartphones. So think about it, 6 p.m., workday's over. 11 a.m., 2 hours in, everybody knows. Give me some fucking credit. That was fast, right? It was a good strategy. So how'd it go over? Well, I can tell you, it took all the strength I had to force myself to go into work that next morning after the board meeting. I got drunk that night after it, and that wasn't why though. I just was so nervous to go in, but I knew if I didn't, people would think I was ashamed, and the gossip would just start. So I forced myself to go in. So I was going to go in. I was just going to go in really early, 8:45, early for a creative person. I just wanted to slip into my office and not see anyone, and I knew there'd be nobody on the creative floor before 9, and I was right. So I just sat there in my office waiting for the unknown, and at about 20 past 9, the first person showed up at my door with tears in his eyes to tell me how brave he thought I was. And then after him, the head of print production came by, and she's like all business, all frazzled all the time, one of those types. And she shows up at my door, and knowing I'd be changing my name, she said to me, when you know, let me know how you want me to do your new business cards. I couldn't believe it. it was like a parade outside my eye. It was hugs and well wishes all day. So many stories, a lot of them in the book. I'll tell you one of them. This was my favorite one. One of my buddies who worked in the art studio gave me a bar mitzvah card. Neither of us is Jewish. But on the cover, it said, "Congratulations, today you are a man." And then because he's crafty, works in the studio, on the inside, he customized it to include all of these guy tips he thought I should know. Like always look straight ahead at the urinal. None of that. I don't want to imply that everybody acknowledged it with me. That certainly isn't the case. Most people treated me like they always did, which is all I wanted anyway. But there were some negative reactions. I'd be naive to think there wouldn't be, but none of them were to my face, which was great. And I think having your dad as the CEO helps in that regard. But honestly, the day could not have gone better. Okay, so I made the announcement, and then you know what I did? Nothing. Nothing. I wanted everyone to have time to sit with it, think about it, talk about it, get it all out, and get used to the idea before I made any changes and started socially transitioning. So no changes until I gave it time. And that includes which bathroom I was going to be using. Even back then, 20 years ago, the only thing the people, the board and other people freaked out about was my using the men's room. So I told the board, I thought this might be an issue. They wanted to send out a memo, and I said, absolutely not. For the first 2 weeks, I am not going to use the men's rooms or the ladies' rooms at Arnold for 2 weeks. So don't worry about it. You're probably like, well, what did you do? I would have killed for that setup that you guys have there. That would have been very helpful. But there were no gender-neutral or unisex restrooms on the 8 floors that we had. So what I did, my office, I had an interior office at the time, and it had a support beam kind of right when you walked in. So there was this little alcove thing. So I had facilities come and put a curtain up there. And then I just had this bucket, and I would go behind. No, he didn't. Come on. Come on. Come on. What I did was I would, whenever I had to go, I would take the elevator down 14 floors, go out the back, the lobby, around the corner, 2 blocks to Rebecca's Cafe, where they had a gender-neutral bathroom. Inconvenient? Yes. Especially when you have a bladder the size of a grape, like I do. I've had to pee for the last 10 minutes. But I knew it was better for me and everybody else in the long run, just, to get used to the idea. And I needed to psych myself up for the idea. And by the way, ladies, it is a total step down, the men's room. You're not missing anything. But, when I finally did go in there, the first few times, yeah, people talked. But it died down really quickly because there really wasn't anything to say. I didn't have outdoor plumbing yet, so I was using the stalls. And unlike guys blatantly bringing in reading material, I wasn't making a day of it in there. One guy I saw go in with a Harry Potter book. Really? The theme of my transition was gradual. That was my whole theme. So the physical changes were all gradual. I'd always had short hair, but it was more of a gender-neutral kind of a nondescript haircut. I could have just gone and gotten a buzz cut. It was the summer, it was hot as shit, I'd always wanted one. But I knew if I made a drastic change like that, people would just start talking, oh, you see Chris got a crew cut? Oh, it makes his ears look big. Oh, he should have, whatever it is. A drastic change, it would just give people more fodder to talk. So instead, I cut my hair shorter and shorter in stages over a few months. Same thing with growing a beard. I'm Armenian on both sides. I was on testosterone. There was hair growing everywhere. So if I wanted to grow a beard, I could have grown a beard, But would I have liked to? Yes. It would have covered up my newfound acne problem. There's nothing like going through male puberty at age 26, being at CVS, fighting off all the junior high kids for the last tube of Oxy-10. So a beard would have been nice, but I knew if I grew a beard, again, that would give people more to talk about. Oh, there'd probably be an over-under on how long it would take, the whole thing. So I held off on that. And the creative department, anything goes, wardrobe code, dress code, which actually kind of drew me to the job, to the occupation. I was wearing jeans, sneakers, button-downs anyway, so unless there was a client meeting where I had to wear a coat and tie or something, my wardrobe changes were relatively minor. So all in, by year 2 of my transition, people were coming up to me and saying, I have no idea what you used to look like. And I liken it to, it's kind of like when someone loses a lot of weight. So if someone loses 25 pounds and you haven't seen them in a year, and then you see them and you're like, holy shit, oh my God. But if they're losing 2 pounds a month and you're with them every day, you kind of don't notice it while it's happening. It's kind of that phenomenon. And finally, there's the surgical part of the transition. General rule of thumb, and a lot of you probably already know this, you should never, ever ask somebody who's transgender whether they've had or plan to have surgery. It's none of your business, which makes it invasive, but it's also offensive. And if you see activists in the media, they say it's offensive, but no one ever takes the extra step to explain why it's offensive. Does anyone know why it's offensive? Want me to tell you? Okay, I'll tell you. Your gender is not defined by what's inside your pants. Your anatomical sex is defined by what's inside your pants, your genitals. Your gender is defined by what's inside your brain. So by asking somebody who's transgender the surgery question, what you're implying to them is that you don't believe they're the gender they affirm they are unless they have surgery to physically alter their body. Does everyone understand that? And the fact is, a lot of trans people never have surgery. It's individual decision. Everybody's different. It could be for a number of reasons. A lot of times it's because you can't afford it. Now, insurance, at least in Massachusetts, insurance is covering it. So hopefully that will be a non-factor. It could be a number of fear, the pain. It's a lot to go through. Maybe you can't get, you don't have the support, or you can't get time off, or maybe you're just happy with your body the way it is and it doesn't bother you. So that is something you should avoid. Now, if someone like me is yammering on about it, then by all means, get in the conversation. But, you just take your cues from that person. For me, my personal decision was I knew I wanted to have surgery right from the get-go. It was the only way I was going to feel complete as a man. And there was a time period where, of 5 years, where I had 22 surgeries. That's one every 3 months, The deluxe model does not come easy. I can tell you that right now. But it was worth it. And that was while I was managing the largest account at the agency. So I was really happy that I listened to my therapist. What was I going to do? Make up 22 different stories about why I'm out of the office for weeks at a time? Had I gone and tried to do this secretly? I mean, there was no way. So it was actually much less stressful for me and everyone else on my team. I had a lot of people on my team, and it was great for them because they knew it was not a big secret. They knew the parameters of when I could be reached and when to leave me alone, and they actually used it to their advantage. They would call me to present work when I was most doped up on painkillers, and God knows what I approved. Gotta tell you, I felt bad for Ron. I had one long-term goal when I set out on this journey, And that was not to let my transition define me. I just wanted to get through it and be the man I always knew myself to be. It took time, and all successful rebranding campaigns do. But I think I achieved that goal. I am not my parents' transgender son. I'm just their son. My friends don't introduce me as their trans friend Chris, just Chris, or Eddie, or P-head, or whatever they're going to call me. And at Arnold, I wasn't Chris Edwards, the transgender creative director. I was just a creative director. Well, an EVP group creative director. I don't want to sell myself short. But, the word transition means going from one place to another, and I was here. So for me, if I had to check a box, I would check male. I would not check transgender or trans man. Some people do. It's up to you how you define yourself. I define myself as male. Does everyone understand that? Okay, good. So then came my departure from Arnold to write this book. So now I'm kind of back in this transgender spotlight. I really felt strongly that I needed to share this story. My hope in writing this book was that people would read it. It would be a fun, easy read. From the Amazon reviews, I'm being told it is. People are reading it in one day, 6 hours. And as an ad guy, my goal has always been, when I do spots or videos or ads of any kind, it's to engage and entertain and wrap that message that I want people to walk away with in something fun and engaging. And that was what I sought out to do with this book. And the hope was that people would walk away having read it feeling empowered and it's inspired, because it's a universal message, but also walk away with a better understanding of what it means to be transgender, which will hopefully lead to wider spread acceptance as well. And that was the goal of me speaking here with you guys today. So thank you for having me. I am happy to take any questions you might have, anything. As I said, I've written a memoir. It's all out there, all out on the table, so nothing, if you manage to ask something that is inappropriate, which I highly doubt, I'll tell you and we'll make it a teachable moment.
I recently did a project where I was looking for inclusive images that sort of reflected all people instead of the straight white males that get so much screen time. And I encountered a challenge with transgender people where I couldn't answer the question about where cross-dressing fit in on an inclusive spectrum. Can you give some guidance to whether cross-dressing is something that is generally considered positive for the transgender community, or whether it's insulting? 'Cause I could never figure it out.
I think it depends on who you ask, but for me, I'd like people to understand that cross-dressing is not related to being transgender. It's something that people do for other reasons. Cross-dressers don't necessarily feel that they are the wrong gender. They just enjoy exploring being the other gender every now and then. That's pretty much what it means to me. That's the easiest way that I define it. But I do find that it confuses people who don't understand gender identity, and it clouds things. So I wish people did understand better, because it is very different. Does that help? Okay, sort of. Hi.
Hey, Chris, great talk.
Thank you.
Let me know if this is an inappropriate question. Do you think there's more stigma for transitions that are male to female rather than female to male? Do you have any insights?
So by stigma, do you mean that? What do you mean by stigma? I'm just trying to.
That's a good question.
Do you mean
I feel like maybe I could phrase it as
are not as accepted?
People might question the motives more deeply on male to female than female to male. Maybe that's a good way to phrase it. Again, let me know if this is an inappropriate
no,
topic.
it's not an inappropriate question. I just don't know if I'm the authority on it. But what I would say is, I do feel that a lot of people ask me, do more men transition to women than women transitioning to men? Because that's pretty much what you see the most of in the media. And there's a saying, let me make sure I get this right. Female to male pass better on the streets. Male to female pass better under the sheets. This is a saying that is out there. And what that means is it's a bit easier to be a woman transitioning male physically, to pass. And just so you guys know, the term passing can be considered offensive by some people because that word implies you're pulling something over on somebody, you're faking. So a lot of trans people are bothered by that term. Like if you say, oh my God, you pass really well, I'd never be able to tell. Some people would be offended by that. I'm not, but some people are. So adult men who transition female, it's very hard sometimes to pass. Your body is already developed and your features are set, and it's very hard for some people to pass. So I think that is why trans women are targeted more with violence. It's terrible. I would think, and people have said this to me, if I'm walking down the street, you'd just think I was a short guy. You wouldn't necessarily jump to, you wouldn't. And I'm thankful for that. But I think that for people who are challenged by passing, that stigmatizes them in a way.
Thank you. And I realize that my question has a kind of a gender binary assumption built into it,
right,
which is obviously
that's a whole nother
discussion.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, right.
I just wanted to acknowledge that, but thank you for the answer.
Sure.
I was wondering, when you told the board that you're going to transition, were they concerned that any of your customers might react weirdly? I can see that in a creative community, people were much more accepting because like anything's possible.
Right.
But outside businesses and German Volkswagen, I'm German, I can say that.
Yeah.
They might be a little stiff and say, what? I don't get it. Let's go somewhere else.
Yep. That's a good question. The answer to that is when I told them, it did not come up. And at the time, I was not like a big shot person who had all this client-facing time. I was, 2 years in as a writer. So I had some clients that I would meet with in person. A lot of them were on the phone. And the account directors who came to see me when they heard would come in and say, okay, how should we tell the clients? How do you want to go about doing it? No one said to me, oh no, we're gonna lose business because of you. Now, granted, I wasn't working on Volkswagen, so I don't know how the Germans would have taken it. But I think being a creative person, you do have that flexibility. People are a little more accepting. Since the book came out, I get emails from a lot of people, some of whom are transgender and looking for my humble advice. And a lot of them work at very conservative companies and are asking me for guidance there. And so I was very lucky that I worked in a liberal, I'm in a liberal state, and I work in a liberal industry. And I had job security, which a lot of trans people, most of them do not have. But the one thing I had going for me was I knew I couldn't get fired. My dad's not going to fire me. So that was something that I had going for me. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Where did you find resources about being trans, especially? Like, I know at least my coming out story is so much defined by using the internet at like 3 a.m. on bad days, but considering like not only was there not the internet, but trans was only really being used in academic journals in like 93.
Right.
Where did you find resources to help understand yourselves and like help find resources to help you transition and accept yourself?
That's a great question. And part of me is struggling because to answer it, I'm going to give away something in the book. But do you want me to give it away? Yeah, all right. So there was nowhere, okay? I would go to the library, sneak around, try to figure out the card catalog. I don't know if you even know what that is. And then you'd get there and you'd get to where it's supposed to be and the book's not there. And it would be some type of medical journal that just had a definition. It didn't have anything. So I couldn't find anything. So what I did was, in The Silence of the Lambs, Lecter, when he's telling Starling the history of Buffalo Bill, he mentions 3 places where there are gender clinics. So I looked those up. I think I was able to go in the library and find phone numbers. And I was living at home at the time. So I'd be so scared, I'd have to do it when no one was around, get on the phone and call these places and say, can you send me some information from your clinic? So my therapist at the time, who was not the one I was talking to you about, this was a different one that I saw first, who had no experience. She says, send them to my office and you can pick them up, don't worry. I mean, I didn't want an envelope that says, Center for Gender Reassignment, and my mom gets the mail and is like, what? So I had it sent to her office, and she called me to tell me I could pick them up when they came in. I went to get them, and the envelopes were all opened. And I'm like, who opened these? She goes, I did. I'm like, bitch. And she's like, well, I figured if we're going to talk about it, we should know the same information. And I was like, you whore. So I am in the car. I am so mad. And I get home, and I'm trying to rationalize it. I'm like, okay, it's a federal offense, what she just did. But I understand if she's trying to be helpful. Then I pull the packets out, and she has taken the liberty of highlighting everything negative or risky or scary. And keep in mind, you guys, you couldn't print anything out. That was all I had. So whenever I photocopied it, her highlights are there for everyone else that I'm trying to share something with. The only other information I had was a great article that was in an issue of The New Yorker. And I saved that and I photocopied that, and that was a tool that I used when I was telling people and coaching people on how to tell other people. And I'd say, give them this article, or and use that. But it was tough. It was tough. Nowadays, there is so much information out there. It's crazy. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can I ask a second question?
Yes.
Thinking back of when you were a little child, 5 years old, and your grandma said, sorry, kid, you can't be a man.
Right.
Would you, my daughter is 3.5, almost 4, and I was thinking if she came now to me saying, I want to be a boy, I would put it off as, okay, she's saying this like, I want to be a fish, or, it's just one.
There's a difference. There's a difference between saying, I want to be and I am.
Ah.
Okay? So this is a big thing now.
Okay.
There's a lot of people, both sides, on are kids transitioning too young, what's going on here, and you look for persistence, insistence, and consistency with kids.
Makes sense.
And if a child is saying, I am a boy, it's not, I want to be a boy. Why do you want to be a boy? Well, boys get to play football, and I love football. I mean, there could be a number of reasons.
Right.
But when it's I am,
yeah,
and they're very adamant and insistent, and it doesn't change, that's when you know, okay, something might be going on.
Good point. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi.
You tell a really compelling personal story, and I find it very fascinating. I also find it very political. You look at what was done at South Carolina's HB2, for example, and the way they spoke about it, it's very different than your story about knowing at age 5 that something is seriously wrong, fundamentally wrong with you, although not knowing how to correct it.
I would never say to someone there's something mentally wrong with you.
I didn't say mentally, I said fundamentally.
Oh, fundamentally.
That's
I didn't hear the fun.
different.
I missed the fun in fundamental. Okay. Yep.
So how would you tackle that? How would you reach those people who are so very opposed to a caricature or crazy stereotype of what you went through.
This is the problem. So
but you were in advertising. You have some tools for this, right?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I am not an activist. That's not my deal. So I'm on the board of Greater Boston PFLAG, and the way I help the cause is by sharing personal stories. To me, that's how you change minds, right? It's very different. It's very hard to hate someone. Like, could you hate me after you heard my story? It's very hard when someone shares that personal thing and for someone to hate them. And I find that people retain the message and learn better relating to somebody's personal story rather than sitting them down and saying, okay, here's a Gender 101 class, or read this pamphlet. And so for me, that's how I help, sharing my story, writing this book. I would send them my book, but I'm not going to be the one out there lobbying with signs. That's not me. There are plenty of other people who do that for the community, but that isn't me. And a lot of people ask me that question. But I think that you just have to do what you feel comfortable doing, and I am not comfortable doing that. So I try to help in other ways. So and I'm involved in organizations that are involved in all of that, and I help them with their websites, and I do all kinds of stuff for them. But this is, for me, being on the front line, that's the activism is not really my thing. But it is unfortunate because that's these ignorant people that are making these laws. They're dropping it down to the bathroom and how, they're all perverts. All the trans people are perverts and they're going to molest everyone in the bathroom. There's never been one instance of that ever happening. But, they go on fear. Thank you.